Today's video is going to be on the cardiac cycle. Simply put, it's just really where the blood flows within the heart and, of course, the vessels surrounding it. So that's what I'd like to do today. And to do that, we're just going to cut the heart in half, just like that. And then we're going to watch a movie as deoxygenated and oxygenated blood move through the chambers and the vessels and try to identify all the chambers, the valves, etc. So let's go ahead and take a look at the movie. And we want to go watch the blood flow in kind of in slow motion. All the blue dots represent blood that's been deoxygenated or oxygen poor. All the red blood cells, of course, are oxygenated or oxygen-rich blood cells. And you can see them go through all the different chambers and all the vessels. What I want to try to do is I want to focus on those particular parts so that we can kind of follow that along and go through the entire cardiac cycle. So what I want to do here is I want to first of all go ahead and exit the video and just go through each of the components and then relaunch the video and see if you can follow. We're going to start on the right side. As deoxygenated or oxygenated poor blood comes in from the head as well as from the body, it enters into this chamber right here, and that's primarily the red atrium. It also, or excuse me, the right atrium. Not only is it the atrium, but also the auricle as well. That particular blood is going to travel in this direction right through this valve. That valve is a tricuspid valve, and we'll see that in operation in just a minute. The tricuspid valve has three different cusps or flaps that seal off the division between the atrium and the ventricle. And as this oxygen poor blood starts filling up the right ventricle, when it gets to a certain pressure, those flaps will shut, so that it can generate more pressure as the signal from the central atrial node will clamp down on it and then send it off. Once that oxygen poor blood is trapped in that ventricle and it starts to squeeze, then what happens is, and of course part of this vessel is cut away on this version, so it's going to go through the pulmonary valve. And that's also a tricuspid valve, but it's also semilunar. So the bottom part is kind of the shape like a half moon. So those three flaps are controlled by this semilunar portion of the valve as well. And then it's going to enter into the pulmonary trunk, and it'll go to different sides. So as it goes to the pulmonary valve, that tricuspid semilunar valve will direct it up and then shut tight, so that there's only one direction for that oxygen poor blood to go, is into the lungs via the pulmonary arteries. So it goes from the vena cava to the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, and then out through the pulmonary valve. And after it gets out of the valve, it's going to bifurcate or go in different directions in the pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary arteries, which will then direct it to the lungs, so the CO2 and oxygen gases can be exchanged to make a more oxygen-rich type of blood. So that kind of takes care of the left side. So let's look at it again. And again, follow kind of the arrow. Here it is, from the blood, from the head and also the body. It's color blue. It's going to go through this tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, and it goes up the pulmonary trunk through the pulmonary valve. It bifurcates. Some of this oxygen poor blood will go on one side of the lungs, and of course the other goes on the artery, or excuse me, on the other part of the lungs through the arteries. So that's what happens on the right side. Now once it gets in the lungs, it's not going to be oxygen rich. And as it gets oxygen rich, it's going to change color to the red. So let's go ahead and stop the video. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look on the other side now. Now that all of this oxygen poor blood has been dumped into the lungs, of course, as we inhale and exhale, we're releasing, when we exhale, CO2. When we breathe in, of course, we're bringing in oxygen. As we do that, we turn that oxygenated, or excuse me, the blood that is oxygen poor into oxygen rich. And it's going to get into the blood system via these veins right here, the pulmonary veins. They're going to take basically the blood that the lungs are now shooting right through these veins, and that's going to end up in our auricle and our left atrium. The left atrium then, and here is, right here is another valve. This actually is a bicuspid valve. It has basically two parts, where the other ones had tricusps or three cusps. This has two cusps. And that's what's going to happen there is, as it enters into the left ventricle, when we get a certain amount of pressure, then this thing is going to close off. So the bicuspid valve is going to close off. That bicuspid valve is that point between the atrium, left atrium, and the left ventricle. As this begins to fill up with blood, and that pressure gets to a point, what it's going to do is shut off, and then all of this blood is going to be shunted up, because of course these walls, these thick walls, are going to close in, and it's going to shove this right into another tricuspid semilunar valve, and that's called the aortic valve. And the aortic valve will take it to the ascending aorta into the descending aorta, and take all that oxygen-rich blood and distribute it throughout the entire body. So that's really the entire cycle, taking it from the vena cava all the way to the aorta, from oxygen poor to oxygen rich blood via the pulmonary systems. So let's see if we can put some pins in here again. This right here, aortic valve. This over here is the descending artery. This right here is the superior vena cava or cava, the right atrium. This is going to be the tricuspid valve. This right here is some of the muscles in it, but this is actually the right ventricle. And then, of course, it goes through the pulmonary valve, and then into the pulmonary trunk, and then to the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs, and then back to the heart via the pulmonary veins, left atrium, left ventricle, and then through the valve system. This valve right here is the bicuspid valve, and then this valve right here is the aortic valve. So that's how that happens. I want to show you one last thing, and let me turn that off. Return that. I'd like to just cut this off right here, and I want you to take a look at the shape of these valves, and that lub-dub is the sound of the valves opening and closing. These are the two tricuspid valves. This valve right here, that's basically coming from the right ventricle. So this is bottom of the pulmonary trunk. This is a tricuspid valve. It's also semi-lunar as well. Same over here in the aortic valve. So this is the pulmonary valve. This is the aortic valve. Both are tricuspid and both are semilunar. Now, when we take a look over here, this is that bicuspid valve. You can see it kind of looks like fish lips. It's just two parts to it. And then this valve over here, that's the difference. That's the space between, or controls the amount of blood going from the right atrium into the right ventricle. You can't see it very well, but that's also a tricuspid valve. And with that in mind, let's kind of restore everything the way it was. I hope that's helped you visualize the cardiac cycle. You may want to replay this again and slow it down so you can see all the various chambers and all the valves. We'll see you next time. Thanks.